Today I'll be showing you how to change your PS3 controller's LEDs from the standard red to whatever color you wish. And mine's going to be blue. And these are the LEDs that I'm going to do them with. The size of the LED is 0603. So the first thing I want you to do is to take off the screws in these designated areas. So let's do that. Once you have that done, you're going to take off the cover and you're going to pull it with the back pointing upward. Now you want to be careful because you don't want everything to just fly in every direction. As you can see, I'm having a bit of trouble, but it just pops off. It should just pop off. If there's too much resistance, I suggest you just back off a little. Make sure the battery stays in place. This piece here belongs to the top left of the back side of the controller. Make sure you don't lose it. I would just put it in place and I would put the triggers in the shell and set that aside for now. Next, you're going to take out the battery. Now you have to disconnect it from the small connector here. And make sure you pay attention to how the wires are traced. Just use a tool to slowly and carefully pull it out. And all you have to do is pull up the battery. Now set that aside. Now for this specific PS3 controller, you're going to unclip it from these two areas and you're just going to flip the board over to get to these LEDs. So one thing about the board is it could be damaged by static. Now I've got an ESD strap on, which means I'm grounded. So what you want to do is make sure when you work on a board that you're well aware that it could be damaged by static, and grounding yourself will help. Now these wires can be broken if you move the board back and forth enough because it's soldered to the board. So what you want to do is get a clear view of the LEDs, and instead of taking them out from little motors, I'm going to use this to hold up the board for me. Now, as you can see on the board, there's markings on one side of the LED. This is supposed to signify the negative side. So I'm going to use some flux to help me take off the LEDs. And I'm going to heat up the component. Now, I'm not going to be keeping these LEDs, so if I damage it, I'm not going to mind. So I'm going to go ahead and use solder to help me take off this component, just like that. Now, if you want to keep the LEDs, I suggest you use 2 soldering irons. You want to flatten out the solder here, so when you put the next LED, it's nice and flat as possible. So I'm going to flux the LED again. I'm going to use a little bit of solder on the tip of my soldering iron to help me pick it up again. So while doing this, make sure you don't burn or solder other points and make bridges. This is detailed work. I mean, these components are tiny, so you want to make sure you're not damaging anything else on the board and being very attentive. Now I've gotten 2 off already. So I'm going to use flux and some solder again, and I'm going to use the same technique. As you can see, the board is getting dirty. With all that flux, you want to make sure you don't get that much buildup, but I will get to the part where we deal with that. We want to leave the board as clean as possible. That's assuming you use flux and you're not just using the flux filled solder. Now just make sure when you're soldering and desoldering that you're not dropping any flux or solder behind the controller. You could put something under it, or you can make sure you're not using excessive amounts of either. Now this is the LED we're going to use, and you have to make sure you're aware of the markings. Know which side is negative. As you can see here, the little green arrow is pointing to the left, which indicates negative on the left side. Some LEDs have a green band next to the negative side. Some LEDs just have it where the data sheet shows you. So make sure you're aware of that before you buy them. So I'm going to add a little flux. And I'm going to go ahead and solder one side while holding it down with the tweezers. Now carefully solder the other side. You could add some more flux if you want. You're going to do the same with all the other LEDs. Just be careful that the LED is as straight as possible when you solder on one side to the other. The idea right now is to just get the LED onto the board. So we'll be coming back and making sure we don't have bridges and we don't have solder balls and anything that could potentially damage the circuit when we close up the controller. Now that we're on the last one, I wanted to point something out and make sure you don't damage this component to the right, because it's very close. I understand some PS3 controllers won't have that component that high. So we have all of this flux on this board, and we want to make sure to clean that off. We're not done with soldering, but I want you to grab a brush and some alcohol. I'm going to use 91% alcohol because, well, that's what I could find at the store. You can get 99%, but I don't think it's required. Just don't use too much of it. Dab it on the board a little and use a wipe, or what I'm using is Kimtech wipes, and just clean up the solder from the board. You could do it as many times as needed to make it look clean, but we're still going to use some flux. I just wanted to make sure there's not too much buildup. So let's make sure we get rid of bridges, solder balls, and anything else that could occur. Just touch your soldering iron to the solder and it should flow quite nicely because of the flux. That way you have a flat surface area. And do that for the next 3. Remember to be aware of your surroundings. Don't burn or melt any other components next to the LEDs. Be very vigilant. This is surface mount technology. It is very difficult to see, so having tweezers and even a magnifying glass will help. Now, once you've got all the LEDs on, put a little more alcohol on there and clean it up with your wipe. Don't be afraid to scrub it with the brush. Just be aware you're not damaging any of the components. And it should look like this. Should look clean. Now that we've got the LEDs on, we can put the board back. Make sure you flip the board the same way you had originally turned it, so as not to start twisting the wires. Make sure you watch the flex circuit. You don't want to rip that, or else you're really in trouble. Once the board snaps in, you should be good to go. Now that we have the board in place, we could put the battery back. Now the battery actually has 2 places that it's supposed to go into. Just set it right on top and push down on it slightly, and it should snap in. Now grab your tool or whatever you're going to use to put in the connector, and make sure the wires are in place so they're not smashed accidentally when you close the controller. Now we can add the triggers, and it doesn't really matter if they just popped out and you don't know which side they're supposed to go on. They can go on both sides. They just snap in. Just make sure the spring is oriented in the right direction. Now we could put the shell back on, but this should be a lot easier. Make sure your piece is in there, and we're going to put it on from the triggers first. Now it looks like it can't close because it's on top of the battery, but all you need to do is hold it like this, close the triggers, and push down, and it closes. That almost took no effort, and it's completely closed. Now you're going to put in the 5 screws that we originally took out. So you should have put the 5 screws in. Now, what you want to do is test your LEDs by pushing the PS button on it with your PS3 unplugged. So make sure all of them work and all of them turn on. And whether you did your controller blue, pink, or even decided to just keep it standard red, that, ladies and gentlemen, is how to change your PS3 controller's LEDs from standard red to whatever color you want. Enjoy.